Hello explorers and welcome to another video. Today I'm gonna talk a little bit about linting or typing or rules around how to structure code, how to comment on your code, how to write Java code in a good way. And I want to preface this video with these are my opinions. This is what I think is good for now as a good practice of writing Java code. And you will encounter other peoples that have different opinions on how to structure code and what's appropriate to write in order to do decent coding. Everybody is entitled to their opinions. I'm gonna tell you my opinions and why I think those are the correct choices. But if you get into a code base where someone else have written 90% of the code, for instance, then there is a very good strategy to actually follow the coding guidelines that are for that project, because nothing is worse for readability than different code style guides within one project. So let's start off by talking about variables. So here we have a simple class. Let's say that it's a data class. We have some string here with a name. We have some age variable perhaps. And we can have something floaty like length. So the height of someone, so that could be in feet or in meters, doesn't really matter, but it's a floaty variable. So this is a way that you can in Java actually tell someone that this is a class and it has some variables and you can use those. I don't really like this for a couple of reasons. First off, I want to be specific about where and when you can use this. So now we have a class, and you saw that it actually created this as a public class, because that's a good indicator of what I'm going to say next. Because now we have a default class with default parameters. That means that this class and these parameters can be used within this package. So in this case it's org er swagger. So in this package you can use these variables. And fine, that's a good distinction or a good default, for instance, but it's not that useful. If you write a very small Java application and just use one package, then this could be something that you can work against and that you can use. But you are not really specific, and if you are writing something larger, you really want to tell the others that are going to read your code when it's appropriate to use these variables or this class. So, for instance, in this case, a public class is a really good choice. It can be used anywhere. You can also have private classes. These could only be, a class can't be private, yeah, but you can have private things within the class, and you can have private classes that are private and have another definition of a class in the same file, but you can't have a private class by its own. And you can have a protected class, I think. Protected. No, can't have that either. So there is either public or default classes. But if you have multiple classes in one file, you can have that distinction as well. So let's say that we have this string, it's protected. We have a private and a public. So we have all the different. So if we have a protected name here, this can be reached from within this class, of course, and it can also be reached by any class that inherits from this class. So that's a very good distinction that tells the one that reads this that this is something that we don't think that everybody should use, But in the cases that you need to extend my class and do more work on this class and do changes to the different behaviors of this class, I think it's appropriate for you to actually change this variable. So you can work with this variable if you are a maintainer of an extension of this class. But else, I think there are other ways that you can actually get to this variable. Then we have this private. Then you say that even if you extend my class, I think there are better ways for you to actually access that variable. So I will not allow you to access that variable directly. And then we have this float here that is public. And we say that everybody in the whole world can change this variable. And I feel that in most cases, a member is this case, it's not just a variable, it's a member of this class. To have that actually limits you in the future. Because if you have a variable and you access it, you write to it, and you get data from it, then in the future, you might think that, okay, length is good, but I might just want to return length divided by age, for instance, because that could be a better thing to actually give you a variable of this person will be this length by this age. I'm just taking an example here, but the variables can actually have a different meaning when they come out from the class, and you might want to add extra functionality or extra logic to a variable. And if you have it public, and many people have implemented against this public one, then you can't add this extra logic everywhere, because then you will break someone else's code or your own code. So a good thing is to keep to these first ones here, either private or protected. Let's now start by creating some example. Let's see here, we have int age. So this is our constructor, string name, and float length. So now we have a constructor here where we can create one of these, and we can set each of these like this. And it can be a bad thing that I actually keep the same names here. Some want to actually add some extra information to age, for instance, that you want to say that this is a member, so you want it to have that kind of naming. I'm not really, I don't really think that you need that, specifically if you are in an IDE, because then you will actually get this purple kind of color that tells you that this is a member of this class. And in this case, you need to actually have a this before, just to distinguish between your parameters and your actual members. But I think that's fine in this case. This is not required in any other things that you are using here. So this is a good way to actually give class multiple parameters. And if all these were private, then you have made this immutable in some case if you don't have any setters. So if we create some getters here, so let's see, we have generate, we generate getter for all of these. So now we have getters for all of these. So now I can actually create a class, and I can get all the variables out again. And if I want to, I can add some logic here that I want to return age +1, for instance. And I can do the same up here. I can add some logic when you actually set the variables. And this is a very good data class. You have everything that you need. If you need to actually put it into, for instance, a collection of any kind, then hashes and equal functions could be good to add. You could add a toString, but if you don't have those use cases, this is all that you need for the specific data class. if you have this and you want to add some mutability to it, you can always add a set age, for instance, and change some of these variables. There are instances where people are creating builders to create these huge classes with context in them. So you have a very large data class and you have a builder because you want to set some of the data, but not all of the data. That could be good if you actually are creating some kind of API that other people should use. But if you are writing something on your own, having a data class or something that needs to hold state that has very many parameters, then you have something that is actually hard to wrap your head around and actually keep working with. So perhaps you could, if it's appropriate, split things up into multiple classes and perhaps have them either inherit each other or contain one large class could have multiple smaller classes with the data in them, just to make it more readable. Because what we want to accomplish here is readability, and nothing else really matters. Some small cases you want to do something for performance, but in most cases you want to add to the readability because you write code probably once and you read it many times. So you want to make it very readable so you can come back to it and actually understand what the logic was when you wrote it. If we have a function here and we want to add a for statement, for instance, like this, we can have some values here, like this. This is the preferred way for me to write for statements. Some cases I have also said that I want to not have the extra space in the for statement. The same goes for if statements. I don't really want to have that extra space, or in switch statements. And the reason I don't want that extra space is because I feel that these are very similar. Even though there are restricted words, they're very similar to these kind of syntax that you have up here. You have some kind of function that does something which has some parameters. And I see switch like a function that takes a parameter and has some functionality. An if statement is a function that gives you the possibility to have something optional happen. And a for statement is a function that gives you the possibility to do things multiple times. So I have loosened a little bit about this because I've many colleagues that actually prefer the extra space here. So I'm fine with that. I did a PHP plugins and they wanted spaces everywhere. So if you are writing a plugin for some time and want to follow the WordPress standard, then add a lot of spaces everywhere, and that should be the way to go. I found that adding spaces to things, let's say that we have if not true, then do this. I think that it's more readable for me to have this not separated. The reason I don't want these separated is because this is some kind of operation on this variable. It actually changes the meaning of this boolean or whatever it is, this statement. It changes the meaning of that variable. So I want those to be connected in some way so it's easier to read. And I don't see really why an extra space there would add to the readability. But personal preferences, these are my preferences. And if we have, for instance, this function here, some people like to have the brackets starting on the same line. So they actually want the blocks to be contained in the same flowing line. I don't really see the reason to have this. It doesn't add something to my readability because you have the function start here and then you have the block, and you can actually have a thing happen that will make this worse. And that's if you, for instance, have this and you add an extra after this, then this statement down here is actually valid. You get the red squiggly here because this is not valid, because I need to add the abstract keyword here somewhere. And so I can have an abstract thing if I have an abstract class, for instance. Then these statements are fine because this is some kind of static block that runs some code. So actually separating them on different lines makes it visible to you that you are actually moving the statement to a different line, and therefore you are starting a new block. When if you have it like this, I see clearly that this block is something that contains or is a part of this function. I see that it doesn't have any separation from the function, so that makes it more readable to me. Important part. Then we have the little distinctions. If we have, for instance, something like this, we want to run and we want to run a function. So now I haven't created this run function, but this is totally valid that I have some block here, and then I have A and B, and I have A plus B, or perhaps I will return A lot smaller than B or something. And I believe that you can also change this up so you don't have the return here, so this is also valid. But this is also not a good way to go, because if you want to write this really terse kind of structure, and this really says that you have some interface that you are implemented here. So let's say that we have an interface function. So this function interface has some method that is void add or compare, for instance, A and B, and these are ints, for instance. So this functional interface, if I want to implement it down here, then this will compare A and B, for instance. Then this is a good way you can type this. But if you have this interface that only have one function, so you can actually write this lambda notation, then I believe that it's important to give these variables good names, because then you have actually moved yourself from some kind of structure that you had before into a very much terser notation. So in Android, for instance, you can have this function that set listener, for instance, and then you get mouse click input here or something. You get an actual variable in here that gives you some information, and giving that variable a good name so you can actually see what is happening when you're writing a lambda, because it's a terser notation. You need to add extra context by adding characters to explain the actual context. It goes with anything you do when you are creating function names, when you are creating variable names. try to make them explain what the actual context is. So if you have a variable that is A and B and C, for instance, and you do a lot of calculations and return D, that is very hard to follow and very hard to actually come back 6 months later and understand what that code does. I actually had a colleague way back that created a date function that calculated dates and only had one char variable names in this 200 lines function. Why it was 200 lines, I don't know. What it did, we didn't know that either. We deleted that function and rewrote it because we didn't understand it at all, because we had no context. So adding context, adding clues for the reader is important. Writing a program is pretty much a little bit like writing a novel. You actually want the reader to have enough information to understand what you are trying to tell them, because the computer will understand it, the computer will compile it, will run it and do what you intended. But if you need to change it, you need to understand it. The computer will understand it. It doesn't really care, and if you have a bug, well, that can be hard to find. So let's talk a little bit about comments. So let's say that we have this set age here, but before we have age plus plus. So here we set an age, but we add to the age as well. And let's add a comment here, plus add 1 to the age. This is and here we can say set age to the class age variable that we need to set. So now I've added comments to this. I have added a lot of lines. I have bloated the actual code base, but have I added any extra value to the reader? What we have up here is a kind of ingress to our function. It's a lead-in for the reader to understand what is the intention of this class. The person that wrote this specific method had something in their brain that they wanted to accomplish with this method. And in a short way, they are trying to convey that knowledge to you. And yes, I have actually done that, but this set age tells you pretty much the same amount of information as this whole ingress block up here. And if you are reading a newspaper, for instance, some articles are so short that you don't add an extra ingress to tell the reader what is this article about, because it's not needed. The article is short and concise and will tell you everything that you need. So this kind of comment is not important. And if we look at the other comment here that I have in line, this is a comment. If you're reading a book, for instance, you can see somewhere that somebody puts in a little star and then they put in a footnote in the side of the book. And this is to add extra context to what is written. So if you don't understand the actual language in the book, or you don't understand what the writer or the author is trying to convey with that specific word, for instance, then this footnote will add some extra context so you will understand the material better. And this kind of inline comment is pretty much the same. You have some complex logic that you want to convey to another reader, and it might be so complex that you understand it right now, but if you wait 4 hours, you will have forgotten what this was all about, because it's so complex that you can't really keep it in your mind. Then it's very good to add these kind of context, short notations that actually give you some extra information, a footnote to your code to add extra value and add to the readability. This add one to age does not add anything, because it actually tells you exactly what is happening on the next line. It's no extra information, it's just extra fluff that will not help you reading this. It will just aggravate and be in the way when you are trying to understand what the code is doing. So this is what I wanted to cover today. And remember, these are my opinions, but I think that some of them are valid. If you want to do it my way, then please take this, and if you have some opinions of your own that you want to share, leave them down in the comment section down below. Perhaps you have other things that you don't want to see in your code base, or perhaps you have other reasons why you want things in a specific way. Please tell me. All opinions are welcome. If you perhaps learned something today, then I'm very happy for that too. If you like this video, give it a like, share it with your friends and colleagues. If you haven't subscribed to this channel and like these kind of contents, this is a little bit niche. I don't do these often, but I'm doing tutorials, I solve puzzles, and I do some smaller coding bits and try to actually convey knowledge as best as I can. And I look at new libraries when they come out, when I find something that is interesting that the community might have value on. And I really hope to see you in the next video.